Jedi Apprentice. A lot of Star Wars fans, and fans of fantasy and adventure who were kids and teens in the late 1990s and early 2000s, will remember this series. I loved it as a young teenager. I collected all the books. I do wish few of them were a little longer and more complex, as this was a tier or two below my reading level at that age, but then again, I had no need for them to be the length of the 4th and 5th Harry Potter books, so they are very enjoyable. This is where it begins. Number 1, The Rising Force. I think the first 5 books in this series were released in 1999. So they introduce a 12-year-old Obi-Wan Kenobi at the end of his Jedi training at the temple, and the end of the time span in which he can be chosen by a knight or master to be their Padawan, which seems strange to me. Shouldn't that age be the beginning of that time span in which a knight can take a youngster as their Padawan? I know medieval European knights on which the Jedi are somewhat based. They also have samurai influences. They would take boys from... So boys learning to be knights would be sent to Lord's Castle at age 7 to become a page, in which they would do simple tasks for the master, for the household, as well as, early basic training, and would be taken on as a squire around age 14, a squire being roughly the equivalent of a Jedi Padawan. And then at 18 or the early 20s, whenever their trials would take place, they would have the opportunity to prove themselves worthy of being a knight. So it's said it was supposed to go. So this is strange that those early teens would be the end of the time, but that's the Jedi during this time. They are the Jedi who would only be taking infants or young toddlers into the Jedi Order, and if they don't pass the early test as children, they don't get to be Jedi. Anyway, so, let's see. Obi-Wan Kenobi is about to turn 13 in this book. He was 25 years old in Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. That would mean this story takes place about 45 BBY. As it opens, Obi-Wan Kenobi is battling Bruk Chun, another initiate at the Jedi Temple who he has a long-forged grudge with, and who has won against him, and taunts him into, I guess, unchaperoned battle, after Yoda tells both of them that Qui-Gon Jinn is coming to choose an apprentice, which Yoda knows full well that at this point Qui-Gon has no intention of doing. He comes every year to watch the students spar, but never picks one and says he never will. So, yeah, bit manipulative there, Yoda. And anyone who has been a little boy or has been around young males should well know that sparring matches when adults aren't watching are not only inevitable, they are a very common exercise and contest between them. It's one of the ways in which we express and release energy, and small injuries do happen. And not just young boys, males all throughout their life. I remember in my early years of college when I started playing Dagorher with a small group that would go to these open courtyards on campus. In the city, we weren't out in the suburbs or woods or anything, but those big spaces between the dorm and the library. We would hack away at each other with the foam swords and axes, and I had a double-bladed sword that I built for the game. I still have it. And it would all be controlled by our own agreed-upon rules, not someone watching over our shoulder all the time. I would walk back to my room late at night, sometimes with very sore limbs and fingers, but it was a lot of fun. It's just, the Jedi seem to make the same mistake all parents and teachers nowadays do, that every fight has to be closely monitored, whereas requiring that is actually detrimental to boys' friendship and negotiation skill development. And granted, Brooke is a bit of a bully, though hardly the worst I've ever seen. But once the teacher, in this case Yoda's, back is turned, really, what does he think is going to happen? And the consequences are truly disproportionate. Brock frames Obi-Wan for injuring him, even though they're only slight, and the Obi-Wan receives orders to go away to become a farmer. He's not going to become a knight because he expressed anger, inability to control himself. Yeah, I think that can be a little bit forgiven at 12, 13 when no lasting damage has been done. He is allowed to fight before Qui-Gon Jinn, before he has to go, but he's still sent away to go to the agricultural court to become a farmer. Qui-Gon talks to him briefly, gives him a bit of advice, and that seems like it's going to be it. We do see the first hints of Obi-Wan learning to take a defensive approach to battle, although for a while he will often fight with the aggressive Ataru style until the events of The Phantom Menace about 12 years later. This first book is a typical coming-of-age storyline, with Obi-Wan finding out that the world, in this case, the galaxy and universe, is a much bigger and more complicated place, with far more ambiguous situations than he ever thought before. One thing I noticed when I was growing up reading this series is that the character of Obi-Wan is very similar at this stage in his life to what Anakin is in the Jedi Quest series that has him as a young teenager, and other stories around this time period, a couple of years after the events of The Phantom Menace. He was a very similar kid in his early years. But as Obi-Wan goes through stages and experiences that shape him into a person who learns to fight and approach situations smarter, he becomes quite diverged from his original personality that was similar to Anakin's. Obi-Wan Kenobi is barely making it as a Jedi initiate in this book, usually on either the losing end of fights or fighting his opponents to a standstill, always believing that he is close, just one conversation away from persuading Qui-Gon to take him on, if he just proved himself a little more. And as a result, he has to learn and learn and learn. Whereas, it's not that Anakin never learned, but he got by so much on raw talent that he was never truly challenged in the same ways. After he leaves the Jedi Temple, so the story mostly takes place on a giant box-shaped spaceship called the Monument, in which there are miners working for two companies. The Arcana Mineral Harvest Corporation, made up of Arcanans, a very communal-like species who always address themselves as we instead of I, and a few individuals of other species, and Off-World Mining Corporation, which is very hierarchical and led on the ship mostly by Hutts and Whipped workers who are bullies, but as Obi-Wan learns, he can't always rush into a head-on fight to right every wrong. He meets Qui-Gon Jinn aboard the Monument, who is on his own mission, and a friend named C. Trimba, who helps him investigate a bit of sabotage that reminded me a little bit of the tone of the Paragus level in KOTOR 2, the Sith Lords. Though that was an asteroid mining station, and this is just a cargo and crew transport ship, but reminiscent. They battle Hutts, Whippets, pirates, and eventually crash land on the planet Bandomir, where they are all trapped on a small rocky island and have to fight off dragons to survive. I especially think the emotion between Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi was very well written here. In the beginning, Qui-Gon was adamant that he would not ever take a Padawan again after losing Xanatos. Yet somehow, a bond between him and Obi-Wan is forged, and Obi-Wan is desperate for Qui-Gon to take him on. Qui-Gon struggles. He knows he is disappointing Obi-Wan by not taking him on, even after the boy tries hard to prove himself worthy. There comes a point when Obi-Wan seems to have accepted that he will never be a Padawan, and coming to terms with that decision feels like a weight has been lifted off his shoulders. Yet Qui-Gon comes to feel that he's hurt him now more deeply than ever. The climax is the first time Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi truly work as a team, and it's an amazingly detailed and suspenseful climax, considering the few small chapters that it takes up. They're not quite Master and Padawan yet, though Qui-Gon decides to let events take their course, and he is given a note written by a shadow from his past. I loved this book when I first read it, and I love it still. This is actually a great first book if you're looking to get into the Star Wars Expanded Universe. If you watch the movies, the prequel, the sequel movies, doesn't really matter which order, and you want to get into the Expanded Universe, this is a good place to start. Don't worry about what's canon, or what Disney calls canon. The system is so messed up now that I think what's best is to just consider the stories that you find the most fun and interesting to be the canon version of the Star Wars.